It says we're streaming live on YouTube.
You are good to go.
Good to go. Okay, great. So thank you, Marisa, and Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to CB5's Parks and Public Spaces Committee. My name is Craig Slutskin. I'm the chair of the committee. We have one item on the agenda tonight, followed by new business. Some ground rules for tonight. We're going to hear an application from the New York City Office of Technology and Innovation, affectionately known as OTI, and the franchisee CityBridge about 5G Link NYC kiosks. After they present, we'll allow for questions from the committee members. We'll then take questions from the public and then go into a business session. During the business session, only members of the committee can speak unless otherwise deemed appropriate by the chair. At that point, if we have a vote, we'll take it. The next step would be the deliberation of the full board, which will take place next Thursday evening. Only after the full board has voted, can you promote, or actually I can do it. I want to promote EJ up. Okay. At that point, if we have a vote, we'll take it. The next step will be the deliberation of the full board, which takes place next Thursday evening. Only after the full board has voted does CB5 have an official position. Please check our website, cb5.org, for Zoom registration details of next week's meeting. We'd love to have you attend. This came to us as an application at 1335 6th Avenue to install these towers. However, these towers are new and somewhat controversial. I've seen many posts on Twitter, for example, that people have come home from work, look out the window, and these towers magically appear right outside. So I wanted to take a step back and have the presenters also talk about what these are, why they're needed, what exactly they do versus infrastructure, and their plans for placement throughout the district. We may want to take various approaches after hearing them tonight. We may say these are generally fine and we'll review on a case-by-case basis, such as at 1335. We may also take a position that they're generally not fine and ask for a moratorium, which is what our friends at Community Board 8 on the Upper East Side did. But we should hear from the presenters and ask our questions. Several of you did provide questions in advance, and I thank you for that. They have been forwarded to the presenters and they will hopefully address them. We'll have time for any questions or comments from members of the public, should they have any. To start tonight, though, we're going to switch it up a little bit. I'm first going to ask EJ Kaliparski to speak. EJ, as you know, is the chair for our Committee on Transportation and the Environment. We elected to hear this application in this committee because they're being placed on public spaces and not coming to us through DOT. That being said, there absolutely is an environmental impact, so I thought that hearing from that committee's chair would bring an important perspective. EJ does have another commitment, so he won't be able to stay, which is why I'm going to ask him to go first. That being said, it might be useful in any event because the presenter may wish to address any of EJ's comments when they speak. So EJ, do you want to speak for a couple of minutes?
Sure. Thanks, Craig. And hi, everybody. Obviously, like Craig said, this is an issue that's primarily a question of use of sidewalk space or public space for a commercial purpose. And that's exactly why it's coming to you. Though, because there are a couple aspects of these installations that affect their district's environment as well, I asked for the opportunity to weigh in at your committee meeting tonight. When Link NYC was introduced to us in 2014, it was pitched as a way to repurpose phone booth locations in the city. It took a roughly human height kiosk and replaced it with a roughly human height kiosk that provided charging and info screens and Wi-Fi. It was a pretty clever repurposing of existing sites. 7 years later, in 2021, we got the first renderings of the new generation Link NYC installations, which are 30 feet tall instead of 10 feet tall, that are going to be primarily installed in places where there was no previous obstruction, and which are for the primary purpose of commercial 5G internet service. The public learned that the advertising business of the first kiosks was not financially viable, and that the original kiosks have been losing money for years, and that these new towers are designed with the primary objective of being financially viable by bringing in commercial 5G internet service revenue. So the purpose of these new towers seems to be to pay for themselves. So in 2014, citizens of the district got some nice new services for essentially no new drawbacks. And now that we've seen the new 30-foot version in practice for a year now, we know that the district is getting very little new benefit in exchange for a colossal new obstruction, the loss of public space and nuisance. Pedestrian obstructions are going into new spots. The 30-foot towers obstruct wayfinding and the view of buildings, and we're learning that they block views out of residential windows as well. Residents across the city are waking up one day to discover they have a new obstruction in front of their windows. This is all ostensibly to provide and improve 5G internet connectivity. Though if you know the difference between 5G and 4G, you know that 5G needs all these towers because it has shorter range and essentially needs you to be able to be very close to the tower with nothing between you and the tower to get your 5G speeds. Whereas 4G towers were able to live pretty innocuously on rooftops and the side of private buildings. We're told that 5G towers need to take up our public sidewalk space with these 30-foot physical and visual obstructions. Even though this is likely already the best connected 4G square mile on the planet, it's being suggested now that we need to start giving up new public space in what is likely only the beginning and not the end of a process that will need to keep installing these at shorter and shorter intervals at a huge cost to our standard of living and our general environment for a marginal benefit in speed to the connectivity that we already have. The city's own maps show that ours is is one of the best connected districts in the city. Could these be helpful in bringing connectivity to the broadband deserts in the city and the outlying boroughs? Yes, absolutely. Are they a good trade-off of our public space and visual environment in the densest developed but already most well-connected district of New York City? I personally don't really think so. Unlike 2014, when these installations provided some new benefit for little sacrifice, it now seems like we're being asked to give up dramatic public space for virtually not much benefit, solely to dig the city out of the financial hole it got itself into with the original kiosks. So I think that you as the Parks Committee will hopefully learn a lot tonight, both about the installations and the specific proposed locations. But my personal suggestion to the committee is that the committee could take a position that any and all of the proposed locations of these 30-foot towers in this particular district ask us to incur a literal gigantic burden and a diminished environment for very little benefit. And the committee could choose to take a position that no location in CB5 is appropriate or necessary in the district, or a good trade-off for these pretty dystopian, gigantic monsters. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, EJ. Appreciate it. So I'm going to ask, I guess, Stacy, are you going to be presenting? And I think you should be able to share your screen if you want to pull it up. I think you are. We're planning.
Okay. I was going to kick things off and then hand it over to Rob Sakota, who is from City Bridge, and he can review the site and the proposed plaque on the sidewalk commemorating the first mobile telephone call in front of that site.
Stacey, could you tell us who you are? Just that would be like.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Stacey Gardner. I'm the Senior Director of External Affairs for the Office of Technology and Innovation. With me is my colleague, Brett Sykoff, who is the Executive Director of Franchise Administration and Broadband for OTI. And as I said, Rob Sakota, he is, I don't remember your title, Rob, but he is the mobile telecom guru and leader for City Bridge. So I guess I was just going to give a brief overview, but just since EJ is still with us, maybe I can address some of the concerns he brought up at the top here, and then we can kind of go into the broad overview. So just so we couch this in the right way, Link NYC is a franchise, which means that our agency is authorized to administer programs with private companies on the public rights of way. So in the case of Link NYC, it is the streets and sidewalks. And in exchange, companies pay the city revenue. So just to be clear on the financial hole that he had referenced, the city has not ever lost any money on this program. In fact, we've made over $100 million in revenue on it. And yeah, no taxpayer money was ever lost, wasted, anything. So I just want to make that clear because there is there has been confusion about that in the past, and yes, there were some issues with City Bridge a few years ago that have since been rectified. They have paid us. They continue to pay us, and we're back on track. And that is partially thanks to Rob and his company getting involved in the project. And so for CB5 specifically, and you know, I think he alluded to people saying that new towers sprung up overnight, something like that. For this program, what we're doing right now, which is presenting to the public on the sites within a 60-day comment period, this is precisely what we're trying to avoid, is that people don't know that they're coming and didn't have any say before they came to their neighborhood. So we send out locations to each community board. This is a citywide program. I literally sent like 18 to 20 of these letters out earlier this week, which means these are in all 5 boroughs, in all neighborhoods throughout. So this isn't something we're saying like, okay, we're only going to do this in Manhattan. In fact, the entire the way that we structured the franchise when we did an amendment to it actually says that 90% of the new kiosks need to be outside of Central Business District Manhattan, so above 96th Street and in the outer boroughs, with the exception of Community Board 3 in Manhattan, which is an equity district that we identified as having lower connectivity. So yes, this program is majority for communities outside of Manhattan. However, we are deploying a limited number of sites in Manhattan that are very purposeful. And, you know, as we're going through this process, we're educating the communities on what the benefits they're bringing to the residents and the businesses and everything like that. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands we haven't been doing this process in the dark. And there has been a little confusion, perhaps in some of the articles that have come out, because there's 2 programs that we administer. One is Link NYC, and we'll get more into that later. There's also mobile telecommunications franchises, which allow companies to install equipment on existing poles. So that is a street light or a traffic light or utility pole. Brett's team also administers that franchise. It's slightly different. But some of the attention that has gone out there about quote unquote 5G towers have actually been attachments to existing poles, which, you know, that program has been going on for, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, about 15 years. And there's over 10,000 of these 4G and 5G throughout the city. And EJ did mention, you know, that their utility is that we all use cell phones. We all like having really fast service, and having this equipment on poles, in addition to rooftops and other private property, is what runs the things that we use constantly every day. So although it's a wireless connection, it's wired somewhere, and we do enable the deployment of that equipment so that we all stay connected. So the one particular site in the Upper East Side that was actually on a pole top and not a Link NYC. The Link NYC is their newer program. It is a new structure. It isn't always going to be where a payphone was, and that's precisely why we come to the communities for their feedback. So that's the purpose here. I guess, does anyone have any questions before I get into a few other details? I know you guys sent a lot of questions, so I want to make sure I address what you guys want to know.
Stacy, I have a couple before we go to my committee.
Mhm.
So is this the only franchisee for 5G, for the 5G kiosks?
So CityBridge is the only franchisee for the Link NYC program.
Right.
But for mobile telecommunications franchises on pole tops, there are like
12.
how many? 12?
We have 12 franchises that are 12 companies that are authorized to apply on light poles specifically.
Yeah.
Do you have a master plan of where you're going to put this? Or is it going to just be CityBridge wakes up one day and says, we need it here. The next day, we need it here. What I'm trying to get at is, do you know where you want to put this? Because I'm assuming they have to be a certain number of feet, yards, whatever, away from each other.
Mhm.
In which case you probably have, I would think that you have thought about this carefully as to where you would want and need to put all of them, in which case I would rather know, as opposed to dealing with this piecemeal, I'd rather know what's coming down the pike, because that every application would relates to each other.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I think it kind of depends on the community district. In some of them, we've, as you might have seen on the Upper East Side, we sent in 18 potential sites. For you guys, it's just the one. So I guess specifically for Manhattan, since we have so few to work with in Manhattan, meaning there's only 10% of the new build that can go within the central business district, those sites are chosen pretty carefully based on a variety of needs. I think I'll turn to Rob to elaborate on that, since you work directly with carriers. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Rob Scott. I'm the president for wireless at CityBridge, as Stacy mentioned. Thank you all for taking the time to go over our plans for your community district. To your question, Craig, about is there a master plan? The answer is really no. As you might imagine, at this point, we're just coming to you for one site here in CB5. This particular site is sort of a twofold site. One, as we talked about earlier, it is a site of some historic significance with respect to the mobile industry, because it's the site at which 50 years from April 3rd, 2023, is the anniversary of the first cell phone call made in the world. And so on that date, April 3rd, there's going to be a little celebration by the Tesla Science Center, which is an organization involved with promoting digital use and mobile technologies to commemorate this event. We are proposing, in addition to the placement of Link 5G, to install a plaque commemorating the 50th anniversary of this, technological breakthrough, which would go at the site. So the site in particular was, in some ways, is unique. This is when we go to other community districts and talk about why we're there, it's the answer is we're there because we're looking to improve the mobile coverage that's being provided. In this particular case, we are going to install mobile radios to improve service there, but the reality is the driving force at this site is to install Lynx 5G in connection with the installation of the plaque and the commemoration of this anniversary. Now, as Stacy said, the plan is, the total plan for Link NYC is for 4,000 kiosks in total across New York City. Right now, there are approximately 2,000 of them already installed. And as you have noticed, most of them are the 9.5-foot version of the kiosk that's been around for several years. I believe there's almost close to 200 of those already deployed in your community district, mostly along 7th and 8th Avenue, a couple along 6th, but mostly on 7th and 8th Avenue. So essentially, your community district already has a very large number of kiosks compared to most other community districts. So the reality is, moving forward, in terms of new deployments, we don't know how many are going to be in each place because, as I mentioned earlier, most of the deployment decisions or future deployment decisions are going to be driven by where mobile carriers like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, others feel that they need additional coverage, either now or they view a situation in which if they don't add coverage now, they're going to have a problem in the next year or so. That's going to be the driving force. So I expect that there will be other new sites in CV5 in the future. I can't tell you exactly where they're going to be. I suspect they probably would be probably along 6th Avenue or other places where there aren't any existing kiosks. But the number of new sites compared to other community districts is likely to be relatively low, given the fact, one, there are so many kiosks there already, and two, as Stacy said, there can only be incrementally, I think, about 200 new kiosks of the Link 5G version deployed south of 96th Street in Manhattan for the balance of the program. So, when you disperse that 200, probably very few are going to be located in CB5.
Thank you. So two follow-up questions from that, and then I'll let my committee members ask some questions. The first question is with the plaque. The plaque, we want to commemorate something, that's fine. Is there a reason why the plaque has to be coupled with a tower? I mean, you could put a plaque anywhere. You could put a plaque at this very location and not have to have the tower unless I'm missing something. And that's my first question. And my second question is there a reason why the towers have to be on the sidewalk, which is an obstruction? When you're talking about 6th Avenue, you're talking about a block, an avenue that there are a lot of pedestrians. The pedestrian space, as you know, is very, very vital, and it's a commodity. And we're giving that, you're asking the public to give that space up. So do these actually need to be on the sidewalk as opposed to a rooftop, or even inside a building somewhere, hidden somewhere that's not going to be as obstructive?
I'll take your second question first, and then I'll go back to the first one. So in terms of where they need to be, the answer is yes. They do need to be on the sidewalk as opposed to either inside of buildings or on rooftops. I do recognize that they take up space, but I would also note that City Bridge has freed up a considerable amount of space on the streets of New York by removing the old telephone booths. In fact, this is pretty close to the corner of 6th Avenue and 53rd Street. There was a phone booth until a year or so ago, just on the opposite side of 53rd, that City Bridge removed. And obviously the Link 5G kiosk is much larger in terms of height than a telephone booth was. You know, the reality is, in terms of the amount of footage of street space it's taking up, you know, they aren't that dissimilar. So I agree to you. I agree with your view that street space is very valuable. There's no doubt about it. We're taking it up for this purpose. Hopefully, like I said, we're giving back, at least in terms of square footage on the street itself, as much as we're taking up. But to your larger question of where do they need to be, they do need to be on the street in order to basically utilize the most recent developments in mobile phone technology. And I think this was touched on earlier by one of the speakers. You know, if you think about, you know, mobile phones, most of us on this call have been using mobile phones from, you know, 20 years, maybe 25 years. And the original mobile phone towers that were utilized to provide these mobile phone signals were generally very large towers. You see them still on the sides of highways. These provided very sort of long distance signals for large areas, but yet they provide a very thin level of what we call capacity. That is, you know, you couldn't carry very much data on them. You know, all you could do is make phone calls, and many times your phone calls would get dropped because of the congestion purposes. One of the ways that the mobile phone companies have, over the course of this 25, 30 years, been able to, one, provide a much higher level of service, including the fact that people are not just making phone calls anymore, they're surfing the web, downloading videos, musics. We know all about all these things, but the amount of data is, you know, increasing geometrically over the years. Is that what was once one very large cell, it's called cell phones because these things were originally, you know, there would be a tower and it would cover a radius, which was called a cell. Those cells are getting increasingly smaller because the smaller the cell gets, that enables the mobile phone companies to utilize the radio spectrum they have more intensely, and therefore get more use out of it. So there's a natural progression as people need more and more capacity. These cells get smaller and smaller, and they have to get closer and closer to the user as they get smaller and smaller. The other factor which is driving you know, changes is, it was mentioned by one of the speakers earlier, is that with 5G, the most recent development in mobile phone technologies, the US government has freed up new spectrum, which is of a higher frequency than what's traditionally been used by the mobile phone companies. And this has two effects. The higher frequencies at one level enable the phone companies, or the mobile phone companies, provide a much higher level of capacity. That is, much more higher data rates can be used at these higher frequencies. But the flip side is that the frequency itself doesn't travel as long a distance. So whereas these cells, like I said, used to be maybe a mile in diameter, you know, a 5G signal, you know, might only travel, you know, 400 or 500 feet. And if you put it on a rooftop, especially in a place like Midtown Manhattan, it's just not going to work. So for the most part, any of the sort of what is called the millimeter wave or higher frequency 5G services need to be almost at street level for a user purpose. And in New York City and Midtown Manhattan, really the only place to do that currently are the street poles that Stacy mentioned earlier. So you'll see that some of the street poles are being reconfigured with these large shrouds on the top, in which you're able to place probably one or maybe two, in some cases, radios. And you're going to see that increasingly throughout Manhattan and the 5 boroughs as street poles are converted to provide this signal. Link 5G does the same thing, except one, obviously it's a new installation in many instances, but two, it was specially built for this purpose. So the amount of capacity or the amount of mobile radios that can go in the Link 5G is much larger. We can probably fit 5 radios in a Link 5G versus maybe 1 or maybe 2 on the pole tops. So if we're looking in the future to try to limit the amount of radio or poles that are changed and shrouds that are built, Link 5G at some level provides a much more efficient service to users than these pole top replacements. But the ultimate answer to your question is, if people do want this technology, 5G technology in New York, there's no place else to put it other than on top of poles. And frankly, other places at the 20 to 30 foot level above the street, which again, in most places, and certainly in Midtown Manhattan, the only place you're going to find is a pole to use that.
Okay, just trying to move the conversation along. And on my first question, do they need to be coupled?
No, there's obviously we can put in the plaque by itself. It doesn't need to have a Link 5G associated with it. But it was our view that we wanted to commemorate both the anniversary of something historic, but also bring something which is in some ways sort of the newest and cutting edge technology in terms of infrastructure to that location at the same time. But you're correct; they don't, as a technological matter, have to be connected.
Right. Okay. I want to give the opportunity to some of my fellow committee members to ask questions. Please remember, we're in the question section. We'll deliberate with our opinions during the business session, but I do want to move this along. Catherine, I think you're up first.
Oh, am I not supposed to have comments? But I do. I have comments and they're quick. I'll go fast, I promise.
Okay, because I want to really get through questions. Because
so if there's one thing that I think you all should revisit, this whole plan that you're laying out needs a good hard look at what it means to have a robust equity plan along a lot of different tracks. The first one is the technology itself, human capital. If this is going to spread all over the city, the people who work on this need to look like all the people who work in this city. And I don't see that. So the human capital across range, I don't just think this is for young people who write code. My mother writes code. So there are people who can do this work to help you ground it. When I think of New York City as a lit city, I think of Thomas Alva Edison. And his plaque sits downtown on a wall by the seaport. And I never hear about his teammate, Lewis Latimer, who was a Black. These are 19th century people, people who lived in the 1800s, where we still live off of their innovation, their work, their blueprint. We still plug things into walls and get electricity and light bulbs. And so I just think one of the things having all these towers throughout Manhattan helps is the people, my family during the holidays, they told me there's one in our neighborhood, it just popped up. And when it just pops up on a blank street, people are like, oh, this is surveillance. But they're like, but at least we'll get more bandwidth. So that's what they're thinking about. I'm thinking every time I pass one, I get great information.
Catherine, I'm
I'll
sorry
shut
to cut you
up.
off.
Okay,
These are more
we'll move
comments.
along.
We'll get into deliberations in a little bit.
I don't have questions. I have comments. Okay.
Okay, great. Dave.
Yeah, 3 quick questions. Google is still the parent company of Link, is it not?
It is not.
It is not.
No. Link, Google is I think a minority shareholder in one of the 3 partners in CityBridge, which is the operator of the franchise. At
So
an
it's
earlier
3
stage
partners.
at an earlier stage of the program, Google had also been a service provider. They essentially ran the Wi-Fi system for the program, but they are no longer involved in the Wi-Fi system. So,
Okay, that leads me to a second question, if I may, about the advertising model that you used originally. This may be a myth, and I want to let me know if I'm misunderstanding this. The advertising model was originally that Link would be able to trace everybody who they were by their cell phone as they were walking down the street. And as they would get to know them, that they would be able to do the advertising directed to individuals by their ping. Now, that's just a myth. Are you shaking?
That is That is not correct. There is no connection between the advertising, the Wi-Fi, or the cellular service we're providing in the future. We provide free Wi-Fi to on each of the kiosks. Each user, when they sign up, puts in their email address, and they have a MAC address. Everybody's device has a sort of a unique identifier. Once we get that unique identifier, we are required to basically encrypt it in a way where we can no longer even associate it with the email. And frankly, the email doesn't even have to be a real email. But we have no knowledge of who is using the system at any given time. And none of that information is used for any type of advertising at all. I mean, I can tell you that I regularly get requests from law enforcement agencies who are interested in knowing that whether someone was using a particular kiosk at a particular time, and they'll give me some information maybe about the person's user information. And our response uniformly is, we can't tell you anything because we don't know. We've created a system where we have no ability to connect any individual person with their device, and certainly not with any advertising. So that is a myth.
Yeah, and just to add there, that we have a privacy policy with City Bridge that the city negotiated with them, and it's a public document, of course. But it is, if they were in any way selling user information or collecting it in that manner, they would be in violation of our franchise agreement. So it is baked into the contract that they are not allowed to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Barbara.
So when I think it was Rob refers to street poles, are you talking about lights? Is that what you're referring to? Yes?
Correct.
Okay. And so the reason why you need to have this separate tower is for efficiency's sake, because you can't put enough equipment on the existing light poles, so that requires installing this new pole 30 feet in the air?
There are a couple of different things. I'll let Fred and Stacy mention as well. Certainly, in terms of efficiency, that is correct. The light poles were made to hold lights at the end of the day. And while we've come up with technology to retrofit them to be able to hold these radios, it is doesn't always work. It's not a perfect solution. In some cases, there are no light poles. So we believe, and I believe it's the city's position, that we need both of these solutions to roll out. The other aspect of the Link 5G, obviously, is that in addition to providing a service with respect to mobile services, the Link 5Gs provide a service to many New Yorkers, provide a free Wi-Fi service, free phone calling, a tablet which provides all sorts of access to social services. And while not all New Yorkers use those services, many New Yorkers do all throughout the city.
I'm just really asking a question about the visual impact. I'm not really talking about the service. I'm talking about the visual impact of having, as some other people have addressed, having a new pole on a sidewalk, which gives it, not only does it take up public space, but it gives it a visual prominence, which I'm assuming you guys would not find objectionable to have outside your window, but other people might. So that's really what I'm addressing. I'm not addressing the issue of coverage, whether we use all cell phones or not. Obviously, yes, we all use cell phones. It is a question of the visual impact, and that is what I'm asking you to address.
The answer is yes. Obviously, there is a visual impact for when we take up space on the sidewalk. And as I said, we're trying to do it in a way that is as most efficient as possible.
Yeah, and if I may, I would just add, these structures are very much complementary, not just to the building rooftop sites, these macro networks, but also the pole top installations that exist now and have for well over a decade. So wherever there's either a light pole that may be unavailable or just not present at a particular location where there is an actual wireless need, these Link 5Gs are able to fill that coverage
But
gap.
it's another piece of equipment. I mean, I just want to be very clear about that.
Certainly.
It is additive. Okay.
Certainly, but I think it's important, it may have been noted earlier, given that the links are, due to its size, are capable of housing equipment from multiple carriers, it ultimately results in a net decrease in the number of new installations, towers that are on the street. So there'll be fewer pole top installations for those who will find those objectionable.
Yeah, but I think you're still, it's the difference between using an existing element and providing a new element. I'm trying to simplify the discussion because I think the discussion keeps getting sort of offbeat. It is a simple sort of math equation that ultimately you are still adding something. Okay?
Absolutely, there's no escaping it. It is additive, and our goal is to limit those additions as much as possible so that it's not as impactful.
I just wanted to be very clear that it is additive.
And I wanted to also mention, I don't think I mentioned it at the top, is that in order for us to have gotten to this point, we needed to bring this to the Public Design Commission. We went through that process throughout 2021, and then for commercial installations, and then we got limited approval for residential as well mid last year. So during that process, I don't know if the folks here have dealt with the Public Design Commission before. They're a tough crowd, right? They're very design minded. They share your concerns about public space, visual impact. We did seek comments from the public on this design at the time that it was proposed. Brett and I and our colleagues did presentations throughout. We know that the design was never going to make everybody happy. We did tweak it multiple times with feedback from the Public Design Commission. So we did have an iterative process on that particular aspect. Did we get feedback from everybody in the city? Did everyone pay attention then, as opposed to when it pops up in front of their house? Of course not. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that we did go through a public process as it relates to the design.
Yes, I'm aware. I assume everybody is.
Thanks, Barbara. Samir?
I have two quick questions, hopefully quick questions. One was talking about the height of the installation. Why does it need to be so tall relative to what was once a phone booth? Why does it need to be 30 feet instead of, let's say, 10? Is that a technical limitation?
The height of the Link 5G is driven by the need to have radios for mobile services elevated to some degree. So the height of the new Link 5G matches the height of the street poles that are existing in New York, and which, as we've mentioned, are also used for, in some cases, housing mobile phone equipment. If you have a radio which is located, say, at at height this level, it's going to be less effective because it's going to get blocked by lots of structures that it won't at 32 feet. And also there's some concern at the end of the day that FCC regulations require there be certain distances from radios from people walking in the street. So at this point, the structure that we have has bays which start at, I think, 20 feet and go to 32 feet. That being a place that we viewed as effective for providing the service.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then my follow-up question, I guess in our community district in general, at least if I look at, a 5G ultra wideband map it seems like there is pretty extensive 5G ultra wideband, at least for Verizon, which is the one example I looked at. Do we expect this to increase 5G service significantly in Community Board 5?
This one pole is not going to, do anything significant. It's really just going to create some space around there. What I would say is that there are many different flavors of 5G. There's lots of carriers who are calling what's called sub-6 5G, which is the use of more traditional frequencies for 5G. It's all called 5G. There's very little at this point in time what's called millimeter wave 5G in New York City. That is I would say, sort of the cutting edge of 5G, the highest bandwidth services, because as I mentioned before, most of that can't really reside on rooftops. It's too far away. So most of the stuff on rooftops in New York is going to be a 4G, an older generation. There are some 5G radios up there, but they're largely not going to be of the highest frequency types.
Todd.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Todd.
Okay, so gentlemen, I applaud the effort by the city and their vendors to bring the latest and greatest technology to our city. I myself am in the technology industry. I know how important it is and how difficult it is to implement these citywide efforts to really make our city cutting edge. And the role of our community board is to balance the interests of our residents and our businesses and their needs, fairly. So again, I just have these comments. I've been looking at.
We're in questions. Do you have any questions for them?
No, this is a comment.
Yeah, we're in question. We're just taking questions for now. We'll go into comments.
So here's my question.
Sure.
I've looked at the image. Are all of these towers, do they all look exactly like this? In other words, it looks like a lollipop, right? A tall, narrow lot, and they all look exactly like this, or do they come in different visual styles?
They're all going to be the same, except for not all of them will have advertising screens.
Okay, so some of them will have like kiosks, more like the kiosks, where there's a screen that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they will all have the same services.
Right.
I got it. Okay, I'll save my comments for later.
Thank you. Aaron.
So in terms of, I have two questions sort of related to one another. Do you have the stat of how many 5G radios have already been installed on lighting poles in our district? How common is that? And I guess why I'm asking that question is it all inside the light pole, or does it add a protrusion on the top of it? Do you have a picture of what that looks like? I know it's a very common thing that's happening. So that's my first question. If totally understand the ultra high frequencies, I have a lot of background in some of the broadcast technologies with the new, next gen, FCC frequencies about what was used to be traditional television now for wireless. So if I'm, with this new 5G technology, and you have the tower, on 53rd and 6th Avenue, 10 feet off the ground. If I spend my day on the 30th floor of an office tower all day long, which is a common thing in our district, right? Am I actually getting any use out of you keep mentioning it has to be on the sidewalk or near the ground because that's where people are walking around. But if I spend my day in an office tower, how does that work? Just given the landscape of Manhattan is that not everyone's on the ground floor or walking around the streets all day. So what is the scenario there? Like, how am I getting my service? If you could just clarify those two things.
Do you want to do the first one first, Brett? I can handle the second.
Please. So with respect to the pole tops, we'll have to look to see how many 5G installations are currently located in the in your community district. But just in general, there are likely dozens, if not maybe close to 100 or more 4G installations that have been installed over the years. And I think you asked if they're contained within the light pole, but they're not. They're attachments outside of the light pole, so they're very visible. So it's essentially a box mounted, like almost a backpack-sized box that houses the radio equipment, and then a relatively thin antenna mounted to the top of the pole, which works in tandem with the box to provide the coverage to the area. But we can certainly get back to the board with respect to the numbers overall 4G and 5G. And Rob, if you want to talk about the propagation kind of characteristics of the 5G from the links.
Sure. So you're correct, Aaron, that like a millimeter wave signal from the street from a Link 5G or from a pole top is not likely to be useful to someone sitting at on the 30th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan. The signal doesn't propagate that far, and it doesn't propagate all that well, frankly, through a wall. Now, the reality is, if you're sitting on the 30th floor of a building in Manhattan, my guess is the 4G services that are sitting on rooftops aren't particularly good in many instances either. If you're in a higher end building in Manhattan, you're probably only getting a good service if somebody has installed sort of an internal DAS system inside that building, because being up that high is not an easy place to provide service. But at the end of the day, the answer to your question is this is largely going to be for people on the streets or people on sort of low floors in buildings. It's not likely to propagate to the 30th floor of an office tower in Manhattan.
Okay, thank you.
Mike.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is, didn't I read somewhere in the 50 some odd pages that I read that the 11-foot high existing, like in that picture on 72nd Street, West 72nd Street, didn't I read that in certain cases, those 11-foot high guys would be replaced by 38-foot high, the new contraptions in the second picture? My first question. And my second question is, knowing technology and how it advances so quickly, can't believe what we see around us today. Isn't it possible that very shortly these things are going to be obsolete because somebody's going to invent a minuscule way of giving that 5-band to the world, and we're going to be sitting there with these obsolete things on 400 feet apart on half the street? Can you address the second question first?
Yeah, I think I can, and then maybe turn it over to Rob if you want to expand on it. So I think it's important to note that these Link 5G structures are very much, at least the top portion, very much just an equipment cabinet that conceals all the antenna and radio equipment within it. So replacing or upgrading the equipment can easily be done as technology evolves without affecting the overall design. So it's imagine just a door that swings open and we cram the radio equipment in there. So I don't know that there's a concern about obsolescence over time, but certainly, if in the future, as this franchise moves on, if there's a need for different dimensions, whether it's higher, smaller, thinner, or whatever, we will certainly move on, just as we did from payphones to the Link 5G. There's always going to be an evolution to this. So I don't know, if Rob, if you want to.
Yeah, I would note that, we do have this, lots of people from a common sense point of view always think that as technology advances, things will get smaller. And in many instances that, for example, the early cell phones were very large and then they got small and then they got bigger again. But at least in recent times, the trend, certainly with respect to small cells, is not for them to have getting smaller. In fact, the 5G radios that are being used are larger than the prior generation, the 4G radios. So when the pole top franchise, which as Brett mentioned, for 15 years, people have been using pole tops for for installation of 4G radios for small cells. When the carriers decided they needed to deploy 5G radios, a whole new shroud was required because the radio was bigger and it was heavier. And so at least with respect to 4G to 5G, radios have not gotten smaller. But Brett's making the basic point, though, that this is an equipment cabinet and it's built to be able to change and be flexible as technology develops, and ensure that the two most important things that any technology is going to need is available. That is, it's connected to power, so that pieces of equipment inside the tower can use that power. And two, it's connected to a fiber optic connection so that those radios or other transmitting devices or whatever in the future people believe is an appropriate use, they have a way to transmit back to an aggregation point where people can collect whatever radio signals are being collected there. So we don't believe that there's too much space here.
Very quickly, just so everyone can see on their screen, Stacy shared a glimpse into some of the infrastructure that we oversee. And just for visual sake, I'll describe, starting from the left is the existing Link kiosk, the current Link kiosk that's been deployed over the last several years. It's around 10 feet high. Second to left is the 32-foot high Link 5G without the advertising screen. Next is an example of a 4G pole top antenna. You can see the black box kind of midway up the pole and a whip antenna at the very top. And to the far right is an example of a 5G pole top antenna. Again, similarly with the equipment box, midway up the pole, and a larger canister antenna, a shroud that houses the antenna inside.
And so they're not going to replace the existing 11-foot high that we see on the left picture with the large one.
I think Rob, please.
Yeah, go ahead. So the answer is, obviously we're here today to talk about the placement of a new Link 5G on 6th Avenue. But in the future, there will no doubt be replacements of the 9.5-foot kiosk pictured here on the left with the 32-foot kiosk, the Link 5G, second to the left. That will occur. Not all of them are going to be replaced. Many of them will remain as is, but some of them will be replaced at some point in the future.
Thank you.
And keep in mind too that the siting criteria for the Link 5G is a little more stringent than the original kiosk. So you might see, especially in Manhattan right now, because of where the payphones had been placed, they were kind of clustered a lot closer together. You might see one on each corner at an intersection. Link 5Gs cannot be placed that close together. In fact, there can only be one on a block and on only one side of the block, in addition to over 100 other siting criteria. Distance to the tree pit you see there, curb cut, line of sight, width of sidewalk, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of siting criteria. They can't just be placed anywhere. I know congestion has been brought up a couple of times. That is baked into that siting criteria to ensure that there can be enough pedestrian flow.
Barbara, and then I also want to get to the public as well.
So I just want to confirm. So the future is the second photo that you had. Eventually, that's what all of them will be like.
No, well, some of them will be like that, but there will always, not all of them, as Stacy said. The Link 1.0, as we call them, the 9.5-foot, are you might see two on a block, or two within 100 feet of each other. The Link 5Gs have to be spread much more sparsely than that. In fact, we wouldn't want them that close. So
Right.
It's going to be a large number of the existing kiosks will remain in place.
But eventually, some of them will be replaced with the towers. I mean, that's our future. That's the
Correct.
future of the technology.
Correct.
Okay.
Catherine.
So I do have a question. So does every street get the same consideration? The configurations throughout our district are very different in terms of street and foot traffic. Do you work with DOT to figure out some of these crowd algorithms? I mean, the ones in 34th Street should be different than Nomad, should be different than 6th Avenue. So along the trajectory, is there a way to figure out, like, because of crowding, how the equipment shares the street?
So at the outset of the franchise, we worked with our colleagues at the Department of City Planning to work on siting criteria. And one element that allowed them to make a determination of really no major land use impact is to ensure that every site have, and Rob and Stacey, keep me honest, I believe it's a minimum of 8 feet clear path. So if there's not, it's either 8 feet of clear path or half the sidewalk, the greater of those two at each location. So it's under the presumption that there will be sufficient space on the sidewalk for both the lane and foot traffic.
I would just say that my experience now with what I see with the Link kiosks, at least, is that, say in 34th Street, there just is not a lot of room. And so maybe you could revisit this, because between crowds and construction and foot traffic and bike lanes, I think a lot of things are changing. So my question is, can we take a closer look at the distinctions in neighborhoods in terms of actual size of the sidewalk?
Yeah, for sure. And I noted that there's literally dozens of siting criteria, things that we look at, distance from other things on the street so that if things are congested, but we also take just a common sense approach to the siting of many locations are rejected just because it doesn't make sense to have something at a particular location. But to the extent that it complies with the siting criteria and there's an express need for new telecom services, in general, that's how we make our siting decisions. But for sure, every site is reviewed on a case-by-case basis. It's not just automatically approved upon proposal. So yeah, I think I'd suggest that we're already doing very much what you're describing. So I absolutely appreciate that feedback.
Thanks, Catherine. I want to take a moment to see, we have five members of the public on, and see if, I'm sorry, Catherine, your hand's still up. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. If any of the members of the public have any questions at this time, and Marisa, maybe you can help me, because I only see 4 of the 5 actual names. So I see that Charles Disability has a question. I don't know if anybody else does, and I just don't, I'm missing a person. It must be a technical glitch. So
I don't see any other names. There is a phone.
Yeah, there's a phone. I think
on the phone.
Yeah, I see one hand raised, just Charles, but I don't.
Right.
There may be a 5th person that I don't see their name as a technical.
No, I see 5 people, 1 on the phone. For the person on the phone, if you did want to make a comment, you can hit *9 to raise your hand.
Charles Disability, would you, I'm going to ask you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. My question is basically, is the way to sign in for the Wi-Fi service, is that accessible to a person's iPhone Siri or VoiceOver for the blind? So they're able to sign in. So I would like to know about accessibility. I also am a little bit confused. So if the tower is up and let's say it's located in the, I think you said on 6th Avenue, somewhere in the 50s in the district, would someone in the 20s be able to, if they're walking around, be able to pick up the free service? And I was also wondering about, now, and do forgive me, I'm blind, so I don't exactly know how thick this tower looks, but I was wondering, is it possible to, instead of having it on the sidewalk, in the way of pedestrians, could it be attached to a building, like sort of like a drain pipe idea, maybe on the corner of a building, or maybe even have the radio equipment attached to the side of a building. I was wondering if that was possible. I'm also thinking, and again, forgive me, I'm blind, so I'm not sure about how big this is, but you know, it is concerning about space on the sidewalk because, you know, we have outdoor dining and everything. So would this tower be less intrusive as outdoor dining?
Rob, do you want to take that? I know there's a bit to digest there, so I don't know if it's Rob or Stacy that wants to.
Sure.
Wants to address.
Charles, I don't have, the kiosks are set up for people who with disabilities in terms of not being able to see. We have certain services on the kiosk tablets itself where you can call in the people who can read you out the service. I don't know the answer to your question though about signing up for the Wi-Fi. So I'm actually texting one of my colleagues here while we're talking to find that out, because I do want to get back to you on that, because I don't know the answer on that question. In terms of the, you know, putting it on the side of the buildings, at least with respect to the franchise for the Link NYCs, it is a franchise for using the public streets of New York. It is not a franchise that enables anyone to use buildings or other private property for the placement of radios or kiosks or anything else.
And the question on, I believe the answer is no, but if he's on 26th Street, he would not be able to access that. It's just too far away.
It's just too far away. So the Wi-Fi service and probably the 5G service that would be provided from one of these radios is likely to be no more than 500 feet. And probably, you know, if you're getting over 200 feet, probably line of sight to the kiosk itself.
And then his question on whether this is as obtrusive as outdoor dining, it's kind of hard to answer. I would think no, because it's just, there's not 10 tables out. So it's.
Yeah, again, I mean, it takes
a big pole.
Yeah, it's a poll, and I take people's, you know, comments seriously with respect to, you know, it takes up visual space when you look up. In terms of the amount of space it takes up on the street where someone might be dining is, you know, relatively small and not much different from the phone booths that, you know, we've replaced it with. But, you know, we certainly understand that we're taking up valuable street space with the use of the kiosks.
Charles, did we answer all of your, I know you had
I was just going to quickly end with, it just sounds like it would be better positioned in like a housing projects or maybe near a shelter for people who have, you know, who don't have access to internet all the time or can't afford it than, you know, in a commercial area, for example.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. I see Thomas LaMadrid. I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrect.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I was just curious how these towers relate to the home 5G internet. I have 5G home internet here at home in my apartment, and I don't think I've noticed these types of towers anywhere. I know you talked about the millimeter 5G or whatnot, but yeah, will this help provide home 5G internet?
I assume if you have home 5G internet, what you're saying is you've got some type of, from T-Mobile or someone, a wireless router that's getting a service from some signal that T-Mobile or your service provider is providing out on the street somewhere, as opposed to a wired system?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so in theory, you know, that service that you're getting from T-Mobile is probably coming from maybe it's coming from a rooftop. It may be coming from a pole top. I don't know where you live, but it's probably not too far away from your home. The Link 5G could also be used by a company like T-Mobile or others to provide a similar type of service for home use. Essentially, whatever the infrastructure on which your service provider is got their transmitters placed. I don't know exactly what it is, but my guess is it's probably not too dissimilar in some instances from the infrastructure that we have at the Link 5G.
Got it. Thanks. I guess it's a little confusing to me because I guess just what I've been hearing about the distance the 5G can travel and sort of needing to have it on the floor. I'm on the 5th floor, and I seem to get this 5G signal. Of course, I don't know where it's coming from, but it seems to work pretty well. But thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Anybody else from the members of the public that want to raise any issues? So before we go into the specific 6th Avenue location, I'm going to take us into business session. We can always go out of it, but I want to just get some feedback from the committee as to how the committee wants to proceed and the general thoughts at this time. So I'm going to put us into business session, and I know several members did have comments. I know Todd had some comments. I know Catherine had additional comments. So I'm going to open up to the members of the committee to give me their comments on where to how they would like to proceed, whether it's, let's hear individual applications, let's talk about this as a general concept, etc. And we'll start with Barbara.
I think what I've heard tonight is that this is our future. I mean, we may only be having one installation today. It seems clear that we can expect to see many more of them in the district at some point. I mean, I don't even know that we need to know an exact timeline, but as I think maybe you did, Craig, talked about having a master plan. I think we have to think about this in a much more global versus because I certainly have a lot of concerns about this, but in a much bigger than an individual piece by piece application review.
So just trying to ascertain how you want to approach this. Would you want to look at applications now, or would you want more information, more of a master plan before we even do approach that?
I'm not sure that we need a master plan. I mean, I think the assumption is we're going to have many more of these in our district. And I think a question is not how we feel about one at this particular location, but how do we feel about any of them throughout the district? And is this exactly what we want to see? And do we think that all of, a lot of people in this committee are much more technically knowledgeable about this kind of stuff than I am. So I have to defer in terms of some of the technology. But has everything been done to mitigate the visual impact on the city? I mean, because it becomes, as my point was before, everything is additive. Generally speaking, yes, I know they took away some of the phone booths, but generally we get more and more and more and more stuff. And it just creates, especially in such a congested district, it certainly adds to the visual congestion that we already have.
Dave, thanks, Barbara. Dave.
Yes, the presenters certainly did a good job. However, I don't see the need to rush into this. The need for 5G doesn't seem to be so desperate. And like so many things that come before us in Community Board 5, I would love more time for the public, the people, the community, the people of the city to find out about this. So often in a situation like this, a presentation, they just get run through by committees without the public really being aware of what's going on. And I would love for more time for people in general to find out how they feel about this, what they feel about the actual towers themselves. How desperate is the need for 5G? If you're really concerned with spreading communication throughout the poorer parts of the city, it seems to me there's better, easier, cheaper ways to do it than these towers at the moment. I mean, get 4G into the communities right now where they can really use it. So I don't really see the desperate need to get these towers up and going. I would like to take more time with this. I'd love for a better chance For the public, I'd like to see everybody in my neighborhood association to see and learn about this and get their reactions. That's my opinion.
Thank you. And another question is whether or not we would want them in CB5, how many we need in CB5, which is a congested district. Todd.
So, yeah, so Barbara and Dave hit on concerns that I had. What I wanted to say was, what does our committee say and know about things in the public realm, in our parks, in our public spaces? And what we see all sorts of public art projects, we see structures, we pass on landmarks, we weigh all these things against the needs of the general public and their contribution to the community and their appropriateness. At some level, you know, that consideration should come into play. Now, the city makes these decisions and grants the franchises, but our job, I think, should be, we know that these things are going to come in, and it's important that the city have the best technology in all of the places equitably. It's not enough just to stay with the old technology, right? If our city is going to be competitive, we have to allow the new technology. However, right, when I say, does every single one of these towers look exactly the same, right? What were they thinking, right? We as a community board, maybe with the other community board, should have a white paper or some sort of survey where we say, look, these kind of structures are coming in. Can there be some thought? I know the city, this was passed over by design experts, but we've seen every conceivable type of sculpture and commercial art display. I'm sure that if they made a better attempt to make these things distinctive, whether whimsical or in terms of color or in any number of other ways, right? It would add something to the city and the community or neighborhood it's in. So I think what our role, just like we would do when we review art projects or anything else, we should have, or we should encourage that the city, when they grant these franchises, that they should give us, and as David said, the community at the appropriate stage, you know, input into how these things are going to look, or not input, but just be able to comment on it. Because the reality is, we would comment on it, we'd make suggestions about color and shape, and whether or not the design of it could include some component that would allow, you know, some sort of public art to be attached to it, to make them interesting and make them a benefit or something distinctive in the neighborhood, rather than just plop them down like they're from Mars, where people become suspicious of them. The other thing I would say is, and then again, this is just our general rule as a community board, right? Where is the public education about this, right? It's like, if it's going to be, if these things are going to be placed at a certain position and point, there's got to be, you know, something put out in the local newspapers or an article or PR. Well, here's what it is. Here's what it's doing. The city is paying for it. It's part of the program, and it has to be done in a targeted way so people know what it is. And look, it's going to bother people, some people, but the point is, at least let them know what's coming. So I think what it requires is our making some kind of statement that we as the community board, at least as the design aesthetics and the appropriateness of these things, that there should be in the future, or as these franchise licenses are granted, that there be some role for the community boards or for the public to weigh in and give comment on the design, right? And that there be some public component. I mean, it's great that they're coming in front of us now, but if we said that look, if everyone is going to look exactly the same, right? And that to me doesn't make any sense. That's a failure of imagination. Anyway, that's my comment.
So Todd, just a question. So what you say makes a whole lot of sense, but we're here now, right? They have these designs up. The question we have to answer is how we proceed from here. And I'd be curious if you want, if you don't, you obviously don't have to, if you want to comment how you would proceed from here.
Here's what I would say, right? What's done is done, right? On the one hand, what is positive? I am an advocate of our city being on top of the latest technology so that our residents and our businesses have the best of everything, right? However, I think we got to say is these things, having all of them look exactly the same without any effort to take advantage of a visual, they have to be somewhere, but we should comment and say our community board thinks that it was misguided to create the visual image of these things in such an anodyne, uniform way, when with just a little bit of imagination, it could be done differently. So, we've said the good, and we've shot a flare that as they do these things, they've got to open it up for more public comment.
Okay, Barbara.
Oh, at the appropriate time in the process.
I'm sorry.
At the appropriate, you're right. It's too late now, but at the appropriate in the future, at the appropriate time in the process, they've got to get us involved, just the same the way we're involved in so many of the other things that are done in our district that impact on our design and livability and quality of life.
Thanks, Todd. Barbara.
I think that Todd makes some very good points, but I actually disagree that I don't want these to be more visually prominent. I want them to be less visually prominent. I think making them all unique would actually make them stand out a lot more. And I would advocate that perhaps more consideration should be taken to exploring different ways that these could either be integrated into existing infrastructure, or I'm not really sure how private buildings would appreciate having this glommed onto the side of them, unless of course they got paid for it. But I'm actually advocating something that is, either is much more a part of the existing urban fabric without creating a new element, or much more hidden in some way. I would also like to say that I think David made a really good point, which was that, what's the rush? I mean, why should we be pushed to make a speedy assessment right now? I mean, I think we should take the time, and I think that it would be great if there was greater outreach. I think that that's always really challenging. People aren't in tune, and people are very busy, and you're bombarded with all sorts of information. But I think that this really is going to have a big visual impact. And I can appreciate somebody being concerned having this right outside their window. And I don't know anything, and we really didn't ask any questions about if there's any health impact with this being right outside your window. I'm sure, I'm sure we would hear that it isn't, but there would be concern. I was also really concerned about Catherine's comment. I think it was that people thought that this was about surveillance. I mean, again, I think that there really needs to be greater outreach in terms of what this is, and why they are appearing at different places. That's really a concern. Anyway, that's my additional comment.
Thanks, Barbara. Aaron?
Thanks, Greg. So we talked about the idea of a master plan. This is a need of a master plan on a district basis versus, individual locations. I think we would all spin our wheels for hours talking about the merits of, well, does this 32-foot pole work on 53rd and 6th or not on 7th and 8th? So I think from my point of view, we need to look at it as a cohesive master plan for our district versus individual locations. And I would just say, if for 5G to be successful in an American city like New York or everywhere else, the reality that we have to have something every 200 to 500 feet that looks like this, we need a new plan. This is not going to work. This is not a sustainable aesthetic, separate from all, science or health concerns, just from what do we want our cities to look like from an aesthetic landmark district point of view. I think it's crazy that we're putting backpacks that look like that on light poles in the city. And I don't know what the regulations are with that, but I would hope that in a landmark historic district, distinctive light district, that there's, I don't even know what the regulations are around that. And that is disturbing in its own, that there's hundreds of those being put up everywhere. But I would say that there needs to be a more in-depth look about how to roll this out. And I am all for 5G and technology, but there needs to be a better master plan of how to roll this out in New York. And New York should be the sort of gatekeeper, and the rest of the country needs to take a look at what we're going to do in New York. This is really important because this has national implications about how New York is going to deal with this. And this is obviously a very timely, urgent technology, infrastructure need. And I think we have to have set a good example for other places. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments at this time from the committee? What I think I'm hearing, and I don't really want to put words in the committee's mouth, so please chime in, is that we're not ready as a committee to approve or look at individual applications. We want more of a holistic approach, which we don't find complete yet, whether it's partially because we want something like a master plan to see how this would work throughout the district. We want more outreach with the public, and also a better way of doing this in a more visual way. So looking at this from a single location on 53rd Street doesn't make sense, and we're not comfortable doing that at this time. I think we're okay with having a plaque there. I don't think anybody cares about anybody has a problem with putting a plaque commemorating something, a historical event there. But I think the application itself for the tower itself, I think that, or any towers at this point in the district, we're not comfortable making. Am I characterizing the committee's opinion correctly? Anybody comment?
Yes, speaking for me, yes.
Yes, thank you, Craig.
I agree, Miriam.
Thanks, Miriam. So,
yes.
Barbara, do you want to make a motion?
A motion to deny?
So I guess the motion would be that the motion I would make.
Sorry.
Make a motion. The motion that I would make is that we ask the PDC, ask the city to have a moratorium until the items that we just talked about are better addressed.
Okay, so we'll make a motion to ask the city to have a moratorium until these other issues can be addressed. And we can get the full scope of what this means for the impact on New York.
Right.
Second.
Todd, I see your hand is raised.
But he's disappeared.
Todd, are you asking a question? I see. You're muted, Todd. Sorry, you're muted. That's why we're not hearing you.
How about now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Todd.
Oh, God, I'm trying to preserve my bandwidth for when I really need it. Is there anything we can put in the resolution to make it clear that we're not opposed to this in its entirety? That we support the concept that it's good that the city is moving forward to give us the best technology, but these are the issues that have to be addressed.
Yeah,
because we don't want to be seen as being anti-technology and getting in the way. The city does so many things that drive us crazy. Here, they are trying to push ahead with this 5G. We don't want to be completely critical.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement. And to Aaron's point earlier, we should have this. It's just, how do you have it when you have these towers that have to be 300 or 400 feet apart? But we should we should have it because we want the best technology in the city, both for tourists and for the people who live and work here. Because we want to be a 5-star city. Okay, is there a second?
Second,
Kim, do you want to take a vote?
Absolutely. Hello, friends. Slutskin,
Yes.
McCall, yes. Achilles,
yes.
Berman,
Yes.
Blake,
Yes.
Ellington,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Lavinia,
Yes.
Payback,
Yes.
Kang,
Yes.
Shapiro,
Yes.
Spandorf.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
So, thank you. So, Stacy, we'll put this in a resolution. Again, we're very supportive of having the 5G technology. We just think there needs to be, as we discussed, some more thought put into this. But we thank you for your presentation, Rob. Thank you, Eric, Brett. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your time, and we'll get you a copy of resolution once it goes through the full board, which is next week.
Thank
Yes,
you,
the
guys.
did a great job. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you to the committee for this. I think it was a very robust and constructive conversation. Are there any items, any items for new business? And that includes from the public. Okay, seeing none, I think we stand adjourned. Thank you again. Happy New Year. It's good to see everybody. And I'll see you next week on Zoom.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we'll be in person soon. Be safe, everybody.